Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series. Can we save the Oakland A's? And things have gone very well for our Oakland A's here in 2043. Just completed the 2043 first year player draft, and our A's sit with a 66-24 record, first place in the American League West, 17 and a half games up on the Los Angeles Angels in the division, and also well positioned to potentially have the best record in baseball once again as we try to clinch home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Had a nice run here with Oakland in our 20th season, trying for our 13th playoff appearance, and we have won 5 championships and counting. One thing that we have not done is win back-to-back championships, so before we eventually move on to OOTP 26. That's one thing that we would love to do here in OOTP 25 with Oakland. And having won last year, this is another opportunity for us to finally have a repeat. As we sit here about 3 weeks before the trade deadline, not really a ton that we need to do to improve this team. First in the American League in runs scored, and you can see we're in the top 2 in every offensive category. Lead the league in stolen bases, lead the league in defensive efficiency and zone rating, and we are in the top 5 of every pitching category, including first in the league with runs allowed. Only criticism of us is that we're apparently not a very good base running team this year, but we've historically been really good and haven't really changed our players all that significantly, so hopefully that's just an aberration. And we'll get better going forward. So no obvious trades that we need to make. We did make a deal around a month ago to bring the left-hander Esteban Narvaez on board. He has not been good with us, the 3-time All-Star, 1-3 with a 6.51 ERA, barely above replacement level in his first 6 starts in Oakland. Brought Narvaez on board because we've had some pretty significant injuries in our pitching staff, with both Doug Weiss and Macho Rangel out until early September most likely, and Ernesto Comunez done for the year. That said, we still have got a pretty highly regarded pitching staff with Arriola, Villarreal, Blumenshine, Narvaez, and Baumler. So unless we have some additional injuries over the next 3 weeks, probably not going to be looking to add more pitching. Lineup-wise, the one thing we've been thinking about is the youngster David Palomares, the left-handed hitting second baseman who's been platooning for us against right-handed pitching this year. And he hasn't been good, hitting just a .97 in 188 at-bats. Only a 62 WRC plus, and he's been below replacement level overall, despite being a pretty good defensive player. Looking at his ratings, still think that he should be a more productive bat against right-handed pitchers than he has been. Interestingly, looking at his splits, he's been awful against right-handed pitchers with just a 48 WRC plus, even though he's hitting just a .88 against left-handed pitchers. Somehow has 5 home runs in those 48 at-bats. So his production against lefties has actually been pretty close to the league average. Looking at Palomares' ratings against lefties and righties, his performance is not logical at all, but it's one season and a relatively small sample size of just a few months at this point. But certainly we'll keep an eye on the trade market to see if there's an opportunity to perhaps upgrade our middle infield. We've also been thinking about and talking about in the comments with some of you the future of Doug Weiss. Signed him to a 5-year extension this past offseason. That was very front-loaded since we had somehow, after all of the departures of this past offseason, a fair amount of money to spend this year. So the $15 million he's set to make for the next 2 to 4 years is not unreasonable. The issue is he hasn't pitched in the majors yet this year. Started the beginning of the season on the IL and then tore his triceps in his rehab start in AAA. He's now wrecked physically and certainly don't want to potentially be on the hook for him for $15 million a year for the next 3 years, depending on whether he opts out. If he comes back from that injury looking materially worse than he does right now, given that we're a win-now team, and I think a healthy Weiss is a good addition to our pitching staff. Over the course of his career, he's put up a 1.26 ERA plus and a 75 FIP minus. And he's been above the league average in both of those categories every season of his career. So we certainly would hope that he comes back healthy and he can contribute this September and into the playoffs. But there absolutely is a part of us that's worried, what does he look like on the other side of this injury, and will we be able to move on from him if we need to? Right now, when we shop Doug Weiss, not going to necessarily get a superstar back in return, but you can see there are plenty of options available for Weiss in a straight-up trade, and I'm sure we could find more than this if we wanted to get him off the books. Now, granted, if he comes back from that injury at the end of this year and he looks like a fraction of what he used to be in terms of his ratings, and he is wrecked physically, the demand is certainly going to be a lot less, but we don't know if that's going to happen. And given that we are trying to win it all this season, my inclination right now is to hold on to Weiss for the time being, hope that he will be able to contribute in September and in the playoffs, and then revisit whether we want him on the team at $15 million a year over the medium term this offseason. And as we start getting ready for the All-Star break, we're in the early stages of an 11-game homestand, split the first 2 against Kansas City, have 2 left against the Royals before we host our division rival Seattle Mariners for 4 games, and then finish up with 3 at home against the White Sox before we get to the All-Star break. Certainly expecting off of a 120-win World Championship Series season, and with a 66-24 record this year, and the best pitching, best offense, and best defense in the American League, that we will be well represented in the Midsummer Classic when all is said and done. And the good news is we've run our record this month of July to 11-1, so we are playing some fantastic baseball. Bad news is another injury to our starting pitching staff. Hopefully this one will not be all that serious. The left-handed rookie Luis Villarreal, dead arm, going to keep him out for a week. 10-4 with a 2.78 ERA this season, a 2.8 WAR his first full year in the majors after he was a September call-up last year, and he has been an outstanding number 2 starter for us. With the All-Star break coming up, no need for us to fool around with him. We are playing every day between now and the All-Star break, so we'll need somebody else come next Sunday right before the All-Star break, but likely to just not put him on the IL, just put him on ice for the next week with the extra days off for the All-Star break. The hope is he'll be ready and well to pitch coming out of the All-Star break at the Rangers. And we continue to win. Unfortunately, the injuries to the pitching staff continue to flare up. Mike Blumenshine, the 28-year-old veteran, having an outstanding year for us, 9-1 with a 2.03 ERA. unfortunately a rotator cuff strain for the veteran, and he's going to be out likely until around September, joining a couple of his compatriots. So it's definitely going to be hard for us to continue playing as well as we have with another one of our big-time starters on the IL. May encourage us now with Blumenshine also banged up to pursue a trade for another starter just for some depth. Certainly not feeling great about how everything is going with the pitching staff at this point. And with Valeriel sitting out until after the All-Star break and Blumenshine now on the IL, the young two-way player Mike Homer back in the starting rotation. He's only started one game for us this year. And we called Jesus Ramos up from AAA to eat some innings for us over the near term, hopefully. Still going to continue pursuing what's available in a trade, given that we've got a lot of guys that we expect back in September. I don't feel like we have to panic as we sit here on July 14th. Alejandro Espinoza and Jorge Bernal are still the two best options available. As we've talked about a lot with Espinoza, he's an outstanding pitcher, but he is fragile physically, and the Royals are looking for a ton to bring him on board. Bernal wrecked in terms of his injury proneness, not quite as good, but somewhat more reasonable in terms of the asking price to bring Tuna Bernal on board as a rental. And although I mentioned that the price for Bernal is more reasonable than the price for Espinoza, the Rockies at this point are still asking for one of the 5 top players on our team to just rent Bernal for the next 2.5 months. So just not a price that we are willing to pay at this point. And we finally lost our second game of the month as we attempted to sweep a 4-game series at home against Seattle. They beat us 3-1. So 3 games left into the All-Star break. Unfortunately, more injury news. Starting second baseman / shortstop Chisen Iwata. Fractured rib, and he's going to be out for 5 weeks, which will likely take him to late August. So perhaps even more of an incentive to try to bring on a middle infielder at this point. Iwata, our leadoff hitter, having another good solid season, hitting .298, 37 doubles, 6 triples, and 6 home runs. Scored 61 runs. He's stolen 17 bases and put up a 127 WRC plus and a 3.7 WAR for us. So we talked earlier about potentially making a trade to try to reduce Palomares' playing time. Now we might need to make a trade just to keep Palomares' playing time where it is. And with Iwata on the IL for the time being, and we'll still continue to look at trades, we're going to bring up one of the top prospects in our organization, Nelson Ramiro, the number 72 prospect in baseball. 4th round pick from 2038, was having a really nice season in AAA, hitting .283, 17 homers, 55 ribbies, a 120 WRC plus. Pretty versatile defensive infielder, the right-handed hitter, and we're going to let Romero be our everyday second baseman now. Going to keep Palomares and Swenson in their platoon, which is now purely at shortstop, as we pivot Palomares over to short. Let the left-handed hitting Palomares and the right-handed hitting Swenson move to the number 1 hole in the lineup to keep the pressure off of the youngster. But given that Swenson is more of a veteran utility man at this point, and Palomares is in a slump and has not impressed in his playing time, we're going to let the youngster Nelson Romero play every day, at least for these final 3 games before the All-Star break, as we continue to think about what we might want to do or not do in the trade market. And one game left before the All-Star break. Fortunately, no new injuries for our team over these last couple of games against the White Sox, which were both victories. All-Star Game prospects roster. Once again, good representation on the pitching staff from Oakland. No position players again this year, but 3 pitchers. Roque de la Paz, the number 79 prospect in baseball, started out the year in Double A, and we recently promoted him to Triple A, where he's got a win in 4 saves in 5 appearances, has not allowed a hit and only 1 walk, so a 0 ERA in his small sample size in Triple A. Another recent promotion to Triple A, Jerry Stevenson, 7th round pick from 2039, number 37 prospect in baseball, and he's had a pretty meteoric rise through the organization this year. Was 3-1 with a 1.42 ERA when he started the year in high A ball, which is where he finished it a year ago. 8-3 with a 2.17 ERA in AAA, and recently got promoted, as we said, to AAA. So 8-3 in Double A. I think I may have misspoke there. 3-0 now with a 1.17 ERA in his first 3 starts in AAA Las Vegas. So Stevenson and Roque de la Paz, the teammates. Also Mike Mercer, former first-round pick with our supplemental pick in 2041. Started this year in rookie ball, 2-0 with a 2.20 ERA there, and then we promoted the 20-year-old to Single A Stockton, 0-1 with a 4.15 ERA, allowed 5 home runs and 9 walks in his first 13 innings in A ball. So certainly hasn't been incredible there, but the number 54 prospect in baseball still throwing in the high 90s, and we think he could be a useful pitcher for us down the line. So 3 Oakland Athletics on the pitching staff for the All-Star Prospects game this year. And in the actual All-Star game, pretty good representation for the Oakland Athletics as well. Federico Arriola trying to win a third consecutive Cy Young Award. He has 13 wins, 13 consecutive Cy Youngs would, I believe, be some kind of a record. But 13-4 with a 3.21 ERA over his first 20 starts of the year. Arriola, an all-star once again. And he'll be joined by our closer, Joe Heilman, 4-0 with 30 saves, a 1.43 ERA, and a ridiculous 68 strikeouts over 37 2/3 innings. Heilman having a monster year for us. Speaking of monster years, last year's AL MVP, Jonah Richards, named the starting catcher for the All-Star game, despite missing about a month with an injury earlier this year. First baseman / second baseman, Luis Godina, back in the All-Star game as well. And third baseman, Juan Pimentel, who's having a nice bounce-back year for him. Not that he's been bad the last couple seasons, but the former Rookie of the Year and MVP had 2 less impressive seasons more recently, but having a nice bounce-back year as well. So 5 All-Stars for Oakland this year: Arriola, Heilman, Richards, Godina, and Pimentel. And another day, another injury for our Oakland A's. Darnell Selvey, the excellent left fielder who is having a bit of a down year for him, didn't make the All-Star team this year after being on the team in both 2040 and 2041. So the second straight year that he's not an All-Star, hitting .271, 11 homers, 51 ribbies. Has been an above-average offensive player, but the former first-round pick going to be out for 4 weeks with a strained forearm. So the injuries continue to build for our Oakland A's as we close in on the trade deadline. Positively, our first-round draft pick from about a week and a half ago, Dante Threats, the young shortstop, has now signed. We have only 2 players left to sign. The second-round pitch, the starting pitcher, Steve Webb, and then the college shortstop, Rick Elvis Harrison, who we picked in the 3rd round. And with the injury to Selvey, we did kind of revisit the top offensive player available, which is the left fielder Juan Hurtado of the Cardinals, last year's NL batting champion who had an OPS of over 1,000. Thought that he could potentially be a nice rental for us. Unfortunately, he is still exercising his 10-5 rights. We'll check in on him down the line, but given that we're only 10 days from the trade deadline, he's probably not going to have a big change in plans. The Cardinals only one game back in the NL Central in a nice, very tight 4-team race between the Cubs, Brewers, St. Louis, and the Pirates. So would be great to see the Cardinals lose a bunch of games and perhaps him get a little more willing to move on, but not necessarily expecting that to be the case. As we sit here at the All-Star game, 20 games up on the Angels in the division, and we are 8 games up on the Tigers, 8.5 up on the Red Sox for the best record in baseball. And we've made it through the All-Star break. We've got 6 games left now before the trade deadline. 3 at Texas, then an off day, then a couple in Los Angeles against the Dodgers, and then we'll finally be back home against Houston on trade deadline day. Definitely the number of injuries that we've experienced this month have given us a renewed interest in continuing to peruse the trade block. Blumenshine, of course, has joined the other 3 starters on the IL. So with Blumenshine, Rangel, and Weiss on the IL, 60% of our proposed starting rotation at the beginning of this season is out. And Ernesto Comunez, who did a great job for us starting several games before he got hurt because of other injuries, is out for the year. Hopefully, again, we'll see Blumenshine, Rangel, and Weiss late August, early September. And the hope right now is the same thing for Selvey and Iwata. We've got the huge lead in the division that we talked about, and a pretty good-sized lead over the Tigers and the Red Sox in the battle for the best record in baseball. So I don't think we have to be desperate, but we're definitely going to not ignore what's available on the trade market either as we sim this last week until the trade deadline. And we've lost our first 2 games coming out of the All-Star game, or the All-Star break and the All-Star game, to Texas, and lost them badly, 10-3 and 11-4 losses to extend our losing streak to 3 straight games. So certainly not generating quite as much offense as we have with Iwata and Selvey now both out of the lineup. Did get an interesting trade offer. The knuckleballer, Andres Rojas, a guy that we've been following since he was drafted out of the University of Connecticut, Avery Point. The Yankees have offered him to us, 5-7 this year with a 3.47 ERA. The outstanding knuckleballer is still a big-time major league pitcher. Unfortunately, even though they'll also give us a minor league lefty, Jesus Del Valle, they want the outstanding young center fielder, Bobby Armstrong, in return. Armstrong leading the league in steals, successful on 40 of 43 tries. Unfortunately, the batting average has been plummeting for Armstrong as the weather has gotten warmer, down to 243 on the year. Still has put up a 106 WRC plus and a 2.9 WAR on the season, but he's definitely been struggling as of late. Taking a look at his batting splits, 333 average in April, 281 in May, and he's been under the Mendoza line by a pretty significant amount in both June and July thus far. So hopefully he can get out of his little slump. Don't know that I'm willing to trade him for a rental of Rojas as much as I like Rojas. 36-year-old in the final year of his contract, although I guess there is a vesting option, so he could be ours for 2 years. But making a ton of money, and particularly right now where we're down two pretty important offensive players already. I don't know that trading a 26-year-old who's signed to a very reasonable contract and is hopefully our center fielder of the future for Rojas makes sense. That said, clearly Yankees are willing to deal him, so we might as well look at if there's anyone else that makes it work. But you can see they would only trade him straight up for one of the top young players on our major league squad. And we won the final game of the road trip against Texas to push our record to 74-28, 18 games up on the Angels, and looks like we are 9 games up on the Tigers, who have lost 4 in a row. Actually, the Red Sox have gotten past them. We're 8 games up on the Red Sox at this point for the best record in baseball. So despite the injuries we have, not feeling desperate to make a move. We've got good depth in the organization, and we can probably handle a less than impressive month of August if we do get most of the guys that we expect back in late August or early September back within the time frame that we're hoping at this point. Juan Hurtado of the Cardinals, now day-to-day for 2 weeks with a finger blister, and he is still exercising his 10-5 rights, unfortunately. Thinking about the pitchers who are available, Espinoza and Bernal continue to be the 2 top starting pitchers available. There's obviously other starters and plenty of starters available if we wanted to try to just bring some depth on board. But most of the veterans who are available are wrecked or fragile physically, and a lot of them, when you look at their profiles, aren't necessarily all that much better than the guys that we have at the back of our rotation right now. Certainly not as strong as we want to be in terms of our pitching staff, with Homer still is our number 5 starter and Ramos working in long relief. But we do still, at this point, anticipate that Blumenshine, Rangel, and Weiss will all be back in late August to early September. So if the pace of their recoveries remains what we expect, we've got a lot of help coming. Then we don't necessarily have to mortgage the future to rent somebody. But we're going to continue investigating things over these next 4 or 5 days till we get to the trade deadline. And we do have a potential trade in place to bolster our starting rotation a little bit for this year and into the future. We're going to potentially pick up the 24-year-old right-hander John Knight from the Pirates. He has now, at this point, spent parts of the last 2 years in the majors. Has certainly not been exceptional with a 105 ERA plus and a 95 FIP minus, but he's been about 5% above average, obviously, if you believe the numbers that those are supposed to represent. He's fragile already in terms of his injury proneness, and he's got a slightly above average pitching profile for a starter. Don't love that he's fragile, but he's a solid, respectable major league arm who could give us some more flexibility down the line if we do decide that we need to move on from Mr. Weiss after this season. Still going to be making the major league minimum next year, throws in the mid to high 90s. I don't love that he's fragile, similar to Macho Rangel, who we picked up this past offseason and is currently on the IL for us. But he is a guy who, when he's healthy, should be able to give us some innings at the major league level and give us a little bit more insurance for the back of our rotation in case some of the pitchers that are hurt right now have setbacks, which we can't rule out. We have to give up Eric Keach, who's been a pretty important arm in our bullpen for the last 3 years, struggling this season with a 4.91 ERA, and he's barely been above replacement level. But the 25-year-old throws over 100 miles an hour, and over the course of his career, he's put up a 162 ERA plus and a 76 FIP minus. So up until this season, he's been a pretty outstanding reliever for us with that incredible fastball. But he is set to start making more money next year, looking at about $2.5 million in arbitration, and doesn't have the repertoire or the stamina to start for us. So although that his high end is better than Knight, and he's also healthier than Knight, I think we can expect to get a lot more innings out of Knight when he's not hurt. And Knight's also going to be cheaper going forward. We also have to include first baseman Chad Allred, third-round pick from 2039. 22-year-old has basically been a league average offensive player this year for us in high A ball. Looks like he could be a useful major leaguer down the line, but certainly nothing exceptional. But would prefer not to give up an important bullpen arm and a decent prospect for a guy who's 24 years old and already fragile. But the high end of the market, the prices are just ridiculous. And given that we are in a win now mode, I want to ensure that we're doing everything possible to keep this team competitive. And one area where we have a lot of surplus in AAA is relievers right now. So even though our starters are banged up, we've still got a ton of good relievers down in AAA. Hate to lose Keach, but as I said, with him being arbitration eligible next year and set to make more money, I think it makes sense to buy a little insurance in the form of John Knight. And if Knight stays healthy, he could be a really nice fourth or fifth starter for us. Had a pretty good contract number for the next few seasons. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade. And we've still got more decisions to make over the coming days. And unfortunately, Knight not quite ready to pitch for us today, so we're going to give Homer one final start. We sent down Jesus Ramos after trading away Keach, and we brought back Luis Aguayo. He hasn't been good for us this year with a 6 ERA and 21 innings pitched at the major league level, but he has been good in AAA. Last season and a half in the majors, though, has not been particularly productive, but the 27-year-old left-hander is durable and still has a pretty impressive arsenal led by that very good fastball. Not quite Eric Keach, but still a pretty good guy to have down in AAA, and given his service time and his performance, he's set to make a lot less next year in arbitration than Keach would have been. No guarantee that Aguayo will be on the roster next year, but think that he's still a pretty good option to bring up from AAA to replace Mr. Keach. And you can't make this stuff up. We lost 10-4 to the Dodgers yesterday when Homer was supposed to be pitching his final game in the rotation for Mr. Knight. But Mr. Knight, of course, came on and pitched just a third of an inning, gave up a home run and a walk, 27 ERA, and suffered a finger blister that's going to have a moderate impact on his throwing for the next week. So we knew he was fragile when we brought him on board, but we weren't quite expecting a finger blister to take him out of the lineup for the next week after getting just one out for us. And just 2 days and 1 game left now between us and the trade deadline as we sit here on the morning of July 30th, up 19 games in the division. The Tigers have been streaking, so they are now the closest team to us in the standings, half a game better than the Red Sox. And the Tigers at this point are 7.5 behind us in the race for the best record in the American League and the best record in baseball. So still feel like we're positioned reasonably well. Going to continue to peruse the trade market and look at some options of guys who aren't being marketed aggressively. Cardinals still in second place, although they've dropped to 3 games behind the Cubs. My assumption is that the veteran Mr. Hurtado is still not interested in waiving his 10-5 rights, but we'll check in one final time. Still looks like he would prefer to play things out with the Cardinals, where he's been a member of their organization for closing in on 15 years. So I get it, but I think you're going to have a better chance of adding a second World Series championship to your resume if you come join us in Oakland, Mr. Hurtado. And the other guy on the trade market, particularly with the ineffectiveness of Palomares and the injury to Iwata that we thought might be able to help us, was Andy Couch, the veteran from the Diamondbacks. Been a bit above league average offensively for the past few seasons, but a perennial silver slugger and all-star back in the day, who was also the 2030 Rookie of the Year. 117 WRC plus for the course of his career. Won a batting title for the Cardinals back in 2031. Fragile physically, but still a good bat and a decent glove. Unfortunately, Couch is also unwilling to let go of his 10-5 rights to join us as a rental. The Diamondbacks 6.5 behind in the division and 3 out of the wild card, but looks like he's willing to continue playing with them for at least the rest of this season. And unfortunately, as we sit here on trade deadline day, none of the guys that we have been hoping might have a change of hearts around their willingness to join us. And that's specifically Juan Hurtado, who's now also injured diagnosis pending, and Andy Couch. And they're both not willing to waive their 10-5 rights. Pitching-wise, although we are certainly not thrilled with the fact that Knight is banged up right after we picked him up, and Narvaez has not been great for us, although he has the record up to 3-4 and the ERA down, sadly, to 5.27. But we picked up a couple of pitchers for relatively reasonable amounts that should be able to help us this year and into the future. More back of the rotation guys in a perfect scenario. But with what we know, it looks like Selvey, Iwata, and Blumenschein all could be back in late August. Still hoping that Rangel and Weiss we could see in early September. So I think at this point we are going to run with the team we have for the time being. Nelson Romero, if you're wondering, has not been good since he came up. Just 3 for his first 30 in the majors. So he certainly has not proven to be the answer. Phil Swenson, basically a league average offensive person this year, but that still stands out compared to both what Romero's done in a small sample size and what Palomares has done over the course of the year with his 184 batting average. But given that we are sitting here on trade deadline day with a 19-game lead in the division, and we're still up 7.5 on the Tigers for the best record in baseball. And when we take a look at our team statistics, 17-6 in the month of July, even with all these injuries. Still the best offense, the best pitching staff, and the best defense in all of the American League. I don't feel like we have to really do anything else that's desperate. The hope is that with the high-quality pitchers and position players we're going to have most likely rejoining our roster over the next month and a half, that we've got all the help that we're going to need to get this team across the finish line for the regular season, and more importantly, to position ourselves well for the playoffs in our own organization and chomping at the bit to come back to help us. So I don't think we're going to do anything else here as we finish off the month of July and move past the trade deadline. And we've moved past the trade deadline, made it to the month of August. Federico Arriola, 4-0 with a 1.05 ERA in the month of July to cap off American League Pitcher of the Month honors. As we've talked about, he making a strong case to win a third consecutive Cy Young Award for us. As we sit here on August 1st, the lead in the division is 20 games, and we're still up 7.5 games on the Tigers for the best record in baseball. So feeling pretty confident we're going to get another division title and ultimately have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Pimentel and Ramirez continue to be tied for the American League lead in ribbies. Bobby Armstrong still leading the league in steals. Pimentel second in the league in batter WAR. Youngster Luis Villarreal, the second best ERA in the American League. He's 11-4. Arriola continues to try to lead the league in wins for a third straight year with a 14-4 record and 3.11 ERA. And the All-Star Heilman still second in the American League in saves, and he's still having a brilliant season with 16.3 strikeouts per 9 innings. So as we sit here on August 1st, the team is in really good shape. Certainly weren't expecting the number of injuries we had in the month of July to keep increasing. But outside of Mr. Comunez, we do expect everybody back over the next month and a half. And hopefully we'll have everyone healthy and well when we get to playoff time in a couple of months. And we'll find out how we do in getting this team back to full health and positioning ourselves for what we hope will be another long playoff run in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope we have a great day.